conditions Florence is likely to bring.
So Florence is getting its act back together. So it was going through what we call an eye wall replacement cycle, which is to say it weakens briefly. That's why you saw that drop. And now you're starting to see the shape of the storm tick back up again. As the storm gets closer to the U.S., it's probably going to stay right around that Category 4 level. So this is the 11 o'clock advisory, 130-mile-an-hour winds moving to the west-northwest now at 16 miles an hour, and it is less than 1,000 miles from North Carolina. The interesting thing, if you take a look at the track of this storm, first off, look at just how warm that water is. So any of these dark reds here, that's a 85-degree water temperature. Wow. That's a hot bath water, if you will, right? So here's the interesting thing, though. Now we have that Category 3 120 right off the coast Friday morning at 8 a.m.
So what?
So here's the key thing to take note of. When we had a 5 a.m. advisory, that was onshore already. So we're now looking at a slowdown as we get closer.
So what are the conditions like in the storm, and once they hit the coast, what are we looking at?
Right. So there's three main factors with this storm. The main factor that everybody really needs to be deadly serious about on this one is the storm surge threat. So we've got a storm surge threat up to 16 feet. That is probably about 2 stories in an average home. And that's one of those things where unless you, and I don't mean to be glib about this, unless you fancy riding out the night on your roof, this is why you need to evacuate. If you are in an area that is on the National Hurricane Center website, you can take a look at the storm surge map. You can see what area you're in. If you're in one of those areas, the time to get out is now. Then we add in some other concerns as well in terms of rain and wind. But the storm surge is that big concern up into the, that's the Neuse River into New Bern. That's the New River into Jacksonville. Parts of the Albemarle Sound going up into parts of Plymouth and Washington. You can see just how deep that inundation goes. That's miles away from the coastline. So it's not just if you're on one of those barrier islands, it's also if you're on any of those interior things. Because here's the problem. You're going to get the winds continuing to just pile water into all of these back bays, and you're going to get that for a long period of time. You're going to get that perhaps for 24 or 36 hours, depending on how much this storm slows down. So it's going to be a catastrophic flooding situation, and that's just from the storm surge, not even talking about the rain.
So game this out for us. It's Tuesday. What are we looking at over the next couple of days? When do we expect the storm will hit? How long will it linger? We've been hearing reports that the storm is going to stay and linger over parts of the region. And then when are we looking at relief? Right.
So we're looking at fairly reasonable conditions right up until Thursday morning. The big concern about this is
Thursday morning.
Thursday morning, right? So that Thursday morning is your day, drop dead. You better be out. Because by the time Thursday afternoon rolls around, that's when you're getting some of the wind. But then the concern is once it starts raining, it may not stop through the weekend into early next week. And that's where we talk about these rain totals. So we're looking at 15 to 30 inches in that sort of bullseye there in coastal North Carolina, but an easy 10 to 15 inches going up through Raleigh, up towards even places like Richmond. That's why if you're evacuating from the coast, you don't want to just go to Raleigh. You've got to go much farther away from that. So your point is to either Washington, to Atlanta, way on into Tennessee. You have to get away from the coast because as this storm makes its way inland, it's going to stall out. So there's my green lines. That's your key places of where you need to go because staying at the coast or even interior North Carolina is not sufficient with this storm.
And so now let's talk about this lingering that it's expected to do. So this is Thursday morning, the hurricane hits, then what?
Right. So Friday morning is when the landfall happens. So the winds start picking up Thursday night. Friday morning, that's when you have some of your worst conditions into Friday afternoon. And then if the storm just sits and spins and spins and spins, it could be days where it doesn't really move. I've seen some models take it a little bit south into South Carolina. I've seen some models just park it by Fayetteville, North Carolina. That's the big question is where exactly this thing is going to go once it makes landfall. We should start to nail that down tonight into tomorrow. But the key thing is if you're in North Carolina and a coastal place, you need to evacuate. Ironically, in South Carolina, where they have the mandatory evacuations, it's less urgent because this storm does look like it is trending further north. Wow.